Hello guys, I wanted to share another material that I made. Thought I wanted to do a breakdown process of how I'm able to get this result here, which is like a carpet Byzantine-like material. And this was inspired by this reference that I found on Google, where at first I was trying to replicate this shape completely, but then eventually the thought of a carpet came to mind later on. So I kind of made it just a little bit different than what is shown here. So I thought I wanted to share with you guys on how I'm able to do that. And I'll go through like a step-by-step process and I'll try to break it down as best as I can. As even though it is a lot to see there, but I'll try my best to kind of break it down and it wouldn't seem too bad at first. I mean, it seems complicated and I guess it is at first, but it's just a lot of subtracting, it's a lot of cutting things out and creating specific patterns off of it. And speaking of that, sorry. So the very first frame that I create here was I'm trying to like establish like a pattern. So on this reference, I was trying to like try to break it down into finding a particular shape that gets repeated multiple times. And this particular shape over here on this corner gets repeated like multiple times on all sides. So this first frame is getting this effect. How I end up getting it is that I kind of begin with a shape node and then eventually moving it to the left side with a safe transform, and I set the offset to 0.5. And then I use another shape node and I set the scale to 0.96. So that way when I combine these two together into a blend, I set this to multiply. So I'm cutting this part in half and there's a bit of an offset there. So I'm only focusing on left side the left side of the image. And the next step is this blend with this shape node here. And it begins with this node and I set this to 0.22 and a safe transform, only changing the y to 0.37. So that way once I combine this and this one over here, I set it to max lighten. So that way this shape touches the very top of this area. So that way it's a seamless transition as it curves down here. And my next node over here is another disk. So this time I set it to 0.52. So that way I can carve a hole in this blend using subtract. And I added a mirror grayscale to symmetrize the top to the bottom. And then I have a safe transform, that's the foreground, based off of this, but I only rotated 90 degrees. So that way, this blend here, I cut off this top portion. So I'm getting rid of the top portion here, and I'm doing the same thing at the bottom, so it's in reverse. And then with this blend, I use a safe transform, and I rotate it negative 90. So it's rotating it towards the left to get this effect. So that way, once I combine with this, I get this particular pattern. And I use add linear dodge or max lighten works the same. So I get this pattern. So now that serves as the foundation, and this is where I'm going to be adding stripes and adding details to it. So that way this gets replicated on all sides to create this effect. So starting with this to my next frame, which is the stripes. So I took this blend and I added a edge detect and I set this to 12.7 and I combine it with this previous blend, subtracted, and now I'm getting rid of the the portion over here and I'm getting this ring. And I added an edge detect two times, so one over here which is 4.31 and the other one 9.43. So that way this will be the first instance of my stripe on this blend. So I'm taking this as the foreground, this one is the background, and I added an add sub blending mode, and I set it to 0.4 with the mask being this, because if I take this off, that's the result you get. So it's like it's graying out everything in the background. So I wanted to only focus solely on this area. So this serves as my mask at the same time, just for me to add an add sub and get this effect here. And this effect here, I set it to subtract only with zero point 0.4. So that way the gray areas have the same value, at least the same color, so it's consistent all around. And I take these two and I added another blend and I set it to multiply. So now you get the stripe effect shown on this reference image over here. So that's that first step done. And before I get to the pattern matching, I'm going to work my way up to the next frame up here. So I'm taking this blend previously and I added a mirror grayscale and I just repeated on all sides, mirror corner, bottom left. And the reason why is because I wanted to get this border over here, which is this border with my mouse cursor is. So I'm trying to get the outer borders over here. And then I added a shape node combining with this, so that way I can subtract it, getting rid of this circle there. And then I take this very same shape node and I blur it up to 10, and then I add a levels node and I crunch the values all the way to the left, so that way this shape node increases just slightly up, and that way I take this result and then I combine it with this, but I inverted, so this is inverted to that, and then I added a subtract. So I'm just getting rid of like the extra portion over here, and I'm only getting the outer, like at least the outer area of this border, if that makes any sense. And I invert it, and then on this blend, I take this blend here and then this inverted part there, and I set it to subtract. And now what's happening is that this white part serves as a mask for what goes on in this area. So it's like I essentially flipped it technically. So now this white area is only focusing on the shapes that I'm going to add later on, and that's going to serve as like a border mask for a lot of things I'm going to add later on. So my next frame is the pattern matching. So going back to my previous one with the stripes, I added a histogram. So now I am like isolating this white part of the area. So I'm getting rid of the gray stripes and I'm only focusing on this portion over here. And the reason why is because now I'm breaking it down further by cutting off certain parts of the shape. And going back to my mask of this, I essentially like cutting off this edge over here, at least this particular shape, so I get this result. And then I'm further breaking it down even more by subtracting that with a safe transform of this mask, which is based off of this. So I rotated 90 degrees, and I'm using that to cut off this excess portion over here. So now I am taking this portion, safe transform it by 90, and combining it, and you get this effect. And I'm repeating it multiple times. So I'm doing the same thing on this side. So I essentially flipped it like by 180. Combined with this, you get this effect using max lighten. So that's like the first part of the step done using this particular, at least the inner portions of this border. And going down here, added another save transform, but this time is I flipped it to the right, and then I'm using that to cut off this portion with this blend. So now I'm cutting off this part here, so that way now I'm further cutting off this extra tidbit here with this very same mask, setting it to multiply. So now I'm having the outer um, border of the edge, and then I save transform it, and I'm doing the same step as previously above, where I'm rotating it 90 degrees, combining it, max lighten, doing it again, max lighten, combining it. So now I get this particular effect. And now I'm using this, combining with my previous shape, max lighten again, and then you get this effect over here. And now the next step is that going back to this histogram select, I added a blend node using this as the background, and then the foreground is this node again, or is the safe transform again. So now I am cutting off everything below it except this portion over here. And this blend node on the right side, at least the next blend node, I'm using this same shape again, and this time I'm using that as the cutter to cut off this portion, because this is where the next shape meets up. So this part is actually over here where my mouse cursor is, and I'm cutting off this information here, so that way whatever I transform my other shape is going to match up with this, if that makes sense. So I cut this off, save transform it, so I'm repeating the same process as before, where I'm rotating it by 90, combining it, and then rotating it again, combining it. And now this time I added a blend, and going back, we're gonna go back to this, but I'm using this I'm using this blend off of this as my cutter, so I'm cutting off this extra information here. And then eventually I'm combining that with this blend, max lighten, and now I'm getting this effect here. And before we go over here, well, actually, yeah, I'm going to tackle this. So going over here, I combine this as the background and that as the foreground. So now I max lighten again, and now it's coming into shape again. And I'll work my way to the bottom because this is like a similar step as the one above, but this time is like the stripe version. So I'm repeating the same steps where I'm using this as the mask again, and I'm cutting off this information on the outside. And then I added a blend, and I cut off this information here using the very same mask over here. So this time I set it to subtract. So now I have this portion, which is this one over here, where my mouse cursor is. So now, repeating the same steps, I use a save transform, rotate it by 90, combining the previous one to get this shape, and then I'm repeating it again to get this effect once again. And same thing as this here with the stripe version, I am cutting it off with the very same mask. Sorry. And then I actually cut off this stripe over here, so then it actually meets up with this portion here. And then I use a save transform, and I rotate it by 90, and I combine it with max lighten, and then I repeat the same steps again. And then I use this very same, I use this blend as my cutter, so I'm cutting off this extra information over here, and you get this effect. And now going down here, instead of setting it to subtract, well, instead of getting rid of this information here, I get rid of this part over here. Similarly to that. And I added another blend using this mask again, and this one over here, set it to multiply to get rid of this information. And now I'm repeating the same steps again, but with the stripes. And then max lighten for both blends. And then when you take this and then you combine that together, you get this effect. Where now one is curving over here, and same over there and here. And then I take this piece and I combine it with that, and then I get this effect. So now it's the same thing as this, but it's the stripe version now. And the next step is that I added a levels node, so that way I move the white values to like 0.5, and then I combine with this blend, with this blend. So I set it to max lighten, and then you get this effect now. So we got back our stripes, and then I added a safe transform, and I only set it to 45. And before we get to this on the right side, we'll tackle this part over here, my next frame, where I'm actually working on this portion here, where my mouse cursor is. So it's like I'm making this half circle, and it's kind of looping around, and you get this shape here. So this is where it begins with this frame. So I took a shape, and I set the scale to 0.52, and I used the y-axis. I actually decreased it to like 0.9, so it kind of flattens a little bit. And then I use a safe transform based off of this shape at the beginning, and I combine these two with this blend, and I set it to multiply, so I cut this circle in half. And then I made a shape here using the same values, 0.52, and I stretched it with the x-axis to, I used the x and I size it up to 2, and I use the same value for the height, so that way it matches up when I combine this together, which is this blend. So I'm taking that and this, max lighten, but using a mask off of this, and I'm inverting it, so I'm flipping the mask, so that way this white area is essentially capturing this shape here along with this, so it's only focusing on the right side. And I added a safe transform grayscale, and I set the offset to 0.52, and I set the rotation to 45, negative 45. And I added a edge detect, and combining with this, I set it to subtract. So I'm getting rid of this this body of information there, and I'm getting this ring. And I use a levels node, so that way I can get rid of this gradient, and I wanted to sharpen it. And this blend over here, I cut off this portion off, combining that and this mask. And where this mask comes from is from this node, which is based off of this right here from previously. So I took that shape and then I rotated 45, and that's going to serve as my mask, or that's going to serve as the cutter I meant to cut off this extra bit here. And eventually it goes into this blend where I have the rest of these nodes, where with this shape I set it to 45, a safe transform, set it to 0.5, and I have set it to vertical tiling, and I use safe transform to actually rotate the shape 90 degrees, so I actually get this effect. And I added a edge detect, and I set it to 9, and I combined this edge detect node with this, and I subtract it. So I'm getting rid of this extra information here, and I'm getting this ring. And now, with this blend, I use this very same mask, and I actually cut off the portions over here, so I'm getting this effect here. And now combining with this, I I actually created this transition. It's a little bit sharp, but from the final result, it doesn't really look like it's sharp in there. It looks like it's actually falling off and it's going to this side. So it seems like it's a smooth transition. So I get this effect here using Max Lighten, and I created another blend. This time I cut off this information with a levels node of this mask. So it's based off this node, but I used two skew grayscales. So these two, I set it to horizontal with an amount of -1, and same thing here. So one is aligned to center, and the other one is the bottom right. So that way, when I combine it with Max Lighten, you get this diagonal shape. And then leveled it, so that way I'm getting rid of like this gradient outline, and I'm like sharpening it. That way it cuts off nicely without any blurriness on this side. And I use a save transform, and then I use a mirror grayscale to get this effect, which matches this piece over here. And I added an edge detect so I can get my stripes. Set it to 3.27, and I set this to multiply with 0.39. And this is the part where it kind of gets a little, well, not a little bit, it kind of gets kind of complicated. So I'll do my best to explain this, but we'll begin with this blend down here. So going back to this blend over here, where I get this result, I added another blend, and I use this mask as the cutoff. Subtract this, I'm getting rid of this extra bit information. So you have this U-shaped ring in a 45-degree angle, and that's going to serve as a cutter to this guy here. So what's going on is that I'm cutting this portion with this, but I'm also using this as the mask, and this comes from this blend here. So after adding this node, and I added another node similarly to this, except this is actually, let's see where it comes from. Okay, yeah, it came off from this. So it's like this was the version that became this, and this inverted grayscale node based off of this, I rotated. So one is slightly shorter than the other, and then I combine those together with subtract to get this border. And since I use that as the background, I use this node based off of this. So this is like the diagonal cut again, based off of this. So it works its way down to this transform, and then I invert it over here, and then it became this result over here, and I set it to multiply. And that is actually my mask for this shape. So I'm cutting off this portion, but I'm only cutting off the area where this mask takes place. So that way it's only cutting off that portion there. And then I'm repeating the same steps again with this. So instead of down here, now it's up here again. And I'm using the same tactic as this, but this time it's actually flipped. So instead of being over here, now it's over here. And it came from the same mask, and this time this one came this. So this is the foreground, and that's the background. And I set it to multiply, and you get this effect. And that is the mask that's going to cut off this portion only using this node over here for my safe transform. Because I have three versions of this. So I have that one, this, and that. And two of these diagonal cutoffs over here. So back to here, I cut off this portion, and then I'm repeating the same step again, but this time is down here. So I'm using the blend, I'm using the node off of this, and then I'm using this as the mask. So it's like now, instead of being here, I rotate it to this side using the same mask and using this as the cutoff. So now it's only showing over here. And now it's cutting off this area. Because this is where, this on. So this is where this diagonal shape is going to meet up, because certain parts of this shape it's kind of like snaking his way around. So it's like you have one that is going underneath, you have one that is going on top. So I'm repeating this pattern all around, and I'm only cutting off certain parts of this shape where this diagonal, I'm cutting off parts of this where it's giving the illusion as if it's actually going underneath or going on top of this diagonal shape over here. So this blend here, so same thing, using this as a mask and using this safe transform as the cutter. So I set it to subtract with this mask. So now it's only cutting this area over here based off this mask. And then I did it again. So same result, this time with this one here. And actually, before I get to that, this is where it ends here, right? Because now I further cut off this portion here, because this next frame where I'm making the circle rings, which is this guy over here, because now this is kind of snaking his way around. So this is going above and this is going right under. So before I get to this, right, I'm gonna work my way down here, because it makes more sense starting from here, and you kind of see why as I'm further cutting off this shape multiple times using these nodes down here. So how I end up getting these circular rings, or how I end up getting these circular rings on the corners, is that with this shape node I create, set it to 0.5, and I set an edge detect, so it's 8.8. Combined with this, set it to subtract, you get this ring. Edge detect again, so I can get my stripes, and I set it to subtract, combining that and this, set it to 0.5. So I use a transformation 2D, and I moved it 0.5 for both X and Y to move it on this side. So that way, on this next blend, I cut off this part here in half using the very same mask up here, this diagonal cutoff. So I cut off this portion here with multiply. So now once I get this, I safe transform it. So now I am rotating this 90 degrees multiple times. So one here, one down here, and one over here. So that way this comes to play similarly to my pattern matching frame, where I'm like taking the same shapes and I'm like transforming them over and over, rotating it every 90 degrees. So this is like the same thing happening here. So starting off from this transform 3D, work my way down, and I'm doing the opposite. So I'm cutting off, instead of cutting this part off, I'm cutting this part over here. And then I made three more transforms. So they're all going 90 degrees on each side. And now taking this, or actually I'll start from the bottom, these two over here. So I take these two and I combine it using max lighten, and then combining this to get max lighten again, and combining this to get max lighten. So now I'm getting um, these shapes here, and I'm essentially doing the same thing on these transforms where I'm just max lighten. So I'm just combining all the shapes together to that. And then when you combine this and that, you get this shape. And I guess maybe in a way it's kind of like a waste to go through this, but the reason why I went for this approach is because now these transforms are playing a part into actually furthering cutting off these things here. So starting where we left off, right? We worked our way. I mean, I guess we stopped over here, so I'm on this plane over here. So now I'm using this transform. I'm using this blend as the mask, and I use a levels node to get rid of this stripe. So now this serves as my mask, and in the foreground is the same safe transform grayscale. So now I'm cutting this. I'm cutting this part off based on this mask, and I'm repeating the same process on this side using this mask based off of this. So I'm repeating it multiple times on all sides using subtract. And then the same thing down here. Right. Yeah, so the same thing down here using a levels node off of this mask to get rid of the gray areas. And then I'm doing the same thing again using this as the mask and using this as my cutter for that. And then taking this, I use a histogram select. So now I am separating the middle portion and the gray stripes. So I got two histograms based off this shape. So one is this and the other one is the stripes. And I'll go back down here to where we left off for this. So I did the same thing as this on the very top, where I'm actually cutting off certain parts of the shape again, because this is where this very same shape that we cut off before is gonna loop its way around. So taking this blend and using this as the background and using this as the foreground. So I'm subtracting and I'm using the mask, which is this one here. So to get this cut off. And I'm repeating the same step again using various transformations of the shape. So now I'm using that as the cutter, using my previous node as the background, and this time using this as the mask to cut off the next part up here. And same thing goes over here. So foreground is that, and the mask is this. So it's cutting off this area over here. And same thing over here as well. And then when you combine, well, at least before combining, I did the same thing as this up top, where I'm adding a histogram, where now I'm just isolating these guys. So I'm getting the stripe version off of this, and then I'm getting this middle portion here. So now when I blend this histogram and this one, combine that together, you get this effect over here using max lighten. And I did the same thing with these stripes to get this effect over here. And now eventually, now it's just a matter of combining the shapes that I made. Well, actually before going to this, I left off over here, so I did the same thing. So I added a histogram select, and I'm isolating the stripes and this portion here. And now I'm actually using a blend node for this, and I subtract this portion here. So that and this, subtract, and this is for the stripes, I believe. Well, actually, no, it's for the middle portion, yeah. And this blend, I use this guy here, and I use the same thing again. So now I'm cutting this off for the stripe, so same thing. And then now I'm combining what I had before to this. If that makes any sense. It's like, I know it's kind of complicated, but I think that's the idea I was going for, where now I'm cutting off certain parts of the shape, and now it's just a matter of combining it all together. So now I'm using this stripe and this stripe here, combine that, max lighten, and I'm combining this with that, and I set to add linear dodge, set it to 0.5 to get back this effect, and then I added another linear dodge from this blend, and I'm combining this shape and that, and add linear dodge so I can get back this gray part here. And I didn't do much with the levels node, but we'll ignore that. And yeah, and this serves as an output for this. Actually, I should have, yeah, so same thing. So after this, add a levels node, crunch the values to the far left side, and then this is like my first mask. So I have a frame of outputs where this mask is based off of this, and I have the second mask, which is the stripes, and this one over here, and I have 3 more masks of like the flower pellets and the star here, and how I end up getting that comes from this node over here. So in my flower frame, I start off with a pellet, at least creating the first pellet. So I created a shape, and I set this to 0.66, and I use a Cartesian to polar grayscale. So it's like, I'm kind of like, I think it's better to demonstrate because it's kind of hard to explain. But it's almost like it's wrapping this shape around as if it were a circle, because then when you mess around with the values, this is the effect that you're getting. Right, and I set this to 0.66 because that way, once I use a mirror grayscale, I symmetrize this side, and then I combine this safe transform, which is based off of this, but I rotated 90 degrees, with this blend. So I set it to multiply, and I'm getting rid of this portion underneath, and and I'm only showing what's above here. And then before we get to this blend, I created a shape node, which is a capsule, and I set the scale to 0.85, and I crunched the values using a levels node, making sure everything is purely white, and then combine that with this, I set it to multiply. So I guess this is kind of like what helps me adjust the shape of the pellet. And then I added an edge detect, and I set it to 6.69, and I combine it with this, and I set it to subtract of 0.55, so I get this gray portion here and this ring. And then I use a splitter circular, and messing with the values, I set the pattern to 14, and I mess around with the size, so 0.42, 0.41 there. I increase the scale to 2, and I rotate the rings to like 90 degrees. And yeah, and that's the only settings I mess with there to get me that effect. And then I added a shape up here, which is a paraboloid 0.08, and I just added a levels to make it binary. So I combine that with this, and I cut off this portion here with subtract. And I added another levels node based on this again. So I crunched the values again, and this time I set it to max lighten because I'm trying to kind of like get the exact same color as this here. It's sort of similar, but yeah, at least I was trying to go for it, but it seems like it's working for what it is there. And I added a histogram select. So this is where this mask, this flower pellet mask comes from. So I'm taking what's there off of this blend, and I kind of added a histogram. So I'm only showing the inner parts of this pellet, because then with the histogram, I'm changing the positions of the values. So I'm only highlighting certain elements of this shape based on the colors. So I get that effect, and down here, I use that to subtract off of this, so I'm isolating. So I'm only getting the rings, I'm only getting the outer parts of this pellet. And going back to this histogram, I added an edge detect, set it to almost 3, combining with this, set it to multiply, and I get this effect where now I'm actually only showing the white values within this shape here. And then I added a blur HQ grayscale, and I added a histogram select, so I'm changing the position to kind of increase it a little bit, and then I combine with another levels node off of this shape, and altogether I added max lighten, so you get that effect, and then I beveled it, so I'm adding another blur to the outlines there, and I set it to like a very small value of negative 0.0005, very tiny, and then I set it that I add a levels node to kind of bring down the gradient just a little bit, and then I added a transform 2D, and I think I only I think I only have it on divide by 2. So I think previously it was like, actually no, I think I scale it down just a little bit with transform, and then I added a safe transform grayscale, move it to the Y by 0.34, and I rotate it by 45 degrees. And then I added a mirror grayscale, and with this blend, I used the same mask, which is this. So which is this, yeah, this large mask there. And then I combine that with this, and I cut off this portion there. And this is how I end up getting this mask over here. That's my output. Because I added another levels node to crunch down the values, so I'm getting rid of the gradients, so I'm making it slightly sharper to get this effect on my fourth output. And then my fifth one, which is this, it's coming from the same area. So after subtracting this with the histogram, my next blend is that I added another levels node off of this to carve a hole over here, and then I use a transform and I scale it down a bit, and then I added another levels node, I guess to ensure that I get rid of most of the blurry outlines. I guess kind of like trying to, I guess trying to like sharpen it just a little bit more. And this eventually becomes my fifth output from my mask. And then the next one here is the star frame right above. So to begin with this, a similar thing to what I did with the pellets is that I begin with a shape, and then I use a Cartesian to polar. So using these values, I'm kind of like making this part diagonal, and I use a mirror grayscale again. And then using the very same node from my pellet frame to cut off this bottom portion, right? And this is where it gets a little weird. So it's like this blend came from these three nodes. So adding a shape, set it to 0.8, did the same thing again, Cartesian to polar, and I used a safe transform with a 0.5, so I moved it to the left. So that way I'm cutting off this portion here. So that way once I added a mirror grayscale, I get this shape over here. And then I added an edge detect, and I set it to like 7.5. And then I combine with this for this blend, and I set it to subtract. So I'm getting rid of this part over here, and I'm getting this ring. And then I added a splatter circular to get this effect here. And similarly to the flower, I added a shape, and I added a levels node. And I use this to, this time I use it to get rid of this artifact using an add linear dodge. And I use another levels node based on this shape to carve a hole there. Which I guess, funny enough, I could have done that first. But then, still a little bit showing up there. But it's very minimal, so you can't really see it unless you really look close at it. But yeah, so I added another levels node off this shape, and I made a hole off of this. And then I use a transform to lower it down, added a bevel, not much of a change here. To be honest, I think at that moment, I don't know what I did there. I guess it was in the heat of the moment as I was doing this. But didn't really do much. But I guess what I did here now is that after this, I added a safe transform. So I set it to like 0.5 and 0.5 for the X and Y to move it to that very corner there. And then I added a mirror grayscale to get this effect. So now that's my last mask. So yeah, that concludes this part here. So I got all the parts that I need because then when I move to my next graph where my carpet is, yeah, all this. So okay, so the very first step, right, is to create these tufts, right? And these are like these individual tufts from the carpet. So very first step is that I created a shape, and I set the size to like 0.01 on the X, and then I lowered down the height by zero point 0.6. And I create 4 instances of this. So I first warped it with a purlin, set it to scale of 7, and messed around with the disorder a little bit to get this effect. And then I beveled it, distance of 0.09, and the smoothing of 3.5. And then with a curve, I kind of make sure that I kind of like smoothen the outline because it's way too blurry there. So I'm trying to like, I guess not smooth, but like kind of sharpen just a little bit, just slightly. And then with a blend, it's based off of off these 3 nodes. So gradient linear 1, and then a levels node, just to make this slightly darker. So that way I'm getting rid of the bottom portion of my tuff. And I added a stripes node over here of 16 stripes, mess with the width a little bit, and shift it to this to make it diagonal like this. And then I combined with a clouds node, and I didn't mess with it at all. Use a multi-warp grayscale. Set the direction to 2 in the mode of min, intensity 3.66. So I get these uneven edges there, these slight cutoffs there. And then I blend it with a gradient linear 1 to get this effect. And I set the multiply to 0.21. And then going back to my tuff, set a blend to multiply again, and I set it to 1. And I did it 3 more times to all this. And these get fed up to these tile samplers, and is using 4 inputs off of this. So before we get to the tile samplers, I'll move my way down here to my ornament pattern. So this is where, at least the beauty of it, is that you can actually take your graph and you can actually inherit it based on my ornaments. So you can actually take this graph and drag it into the graph view, and you can actually use these masks over here. So now what's going on here is that I use like about 5 multi-switch grayscales. And with this is that I'm using this as the first input, and then input 2 as my uniform color. So I'm giving the ability to disable the graphs. I mean, I guess disabling some of the shapes, so you have the option to kind of like turn them on and off. And doing the same thing for all 5 of these multi-switch grayscales. And I already exposed the parameters, so I'll mess with it a lot later on, just to show you. And then down here, I added a border, which is this over here on the 3D view. So I inverted it, and I added a blend, and this is only used for getting rid of the border, so you have the option to turn them on and off. And I exposed the parameter of the opacity, so it's more for visibility, whether you want to have it there or get rid of it. And then I did the same thing here with these nodes, which is all being used to turn them on and off. And now I'm adding a noise onto these ornament mask. And the trick here is that I added a white noise and I set the contrast all the way up to 1. And starting off with this, I combine that with this node, set it to multiply. So you get these noises here, but I inverted it, so kind of paying close attention to this part here. So I'm kind of flipping it. So I got my noise version that is inverted it, and then you got this part here. So it's like I took this, I inverted it, and I added a blend, and I used this as the mask. And I did the same thing to all of these shapes here. And what that does is that this serves as a mask for my tile samplers. So like starting from the top here, which is the main ornament, being this one here. So this is kind of like the drive for this. And using a mask for this map is actually based off of this, because it's kind of like placing where the tufts are going to be. So that way it's supposed to kind of look seamless, because I added 2 variations. So I have this tile sampler off of this, and I have this other version. And they're both sort of similar, but the placement is different as you look closely to each of these two. And then I blend them together to get this effect using max light. Because for each tile sampler, I kind of mess with the size, and I randomize the size, and I increase the scale to like 16, and I randomize the scale, so not all the tufts are going to be scaled uniformly. So some of them are going to be slightly bigger than the others. And I mess with the position random and the offset, and I set the mask map threshold all the way up to 1 for this mask map that I'm using over here. So importantly, you want to set this to 1. And I did the same thing here to the second one to get this effect. And same thing goes with the diagonal flower pellets. So more or less the same settings, because the X and Y amount is either 400 or 300. And a majority of them is either those two numbers. So going back to this blend here, I combined these two together to get that, and then I created a tile generator. So now I set the tiling up to like 2, and the next thing down here is the pellets. So it's same effect, 2 variations, and then I combine them together using max lighten, and then I created another tile generator, and same thing goes for all these shapes. And then this is the blend, and same thing over here. And then for each of these blends, yeah, this is the border here. So 2 variations. And then the very bottom is the background, which is this gray tuff over here in the 3D view. So using all these combined blends on this frame, I end up making tile generators off of them. I'll just scroll each one. And then I use all of them. I use a height blend. So now the idea is I'm using this tile generator for this, and I'm combining it with the background. So I blend it together, because now that way I can use that to color it, but at the same time it creates a mask. And the good thing about this mask, because now I can use that as a way to color each of these ornaments, and that way once I combine them all together it looks seamless. So it's like kind of like a very accurate mask off of this based on the top of this height for this guy. And I'm doing it like two, three, like 5 times. So it's like all these are blending with the background. Same thing here. Same thing over here. And this border over here. And then they all give me mask for each one, which is awesome because then it makes coloring them just a bit more easier for that. Before we get to the top, this is where I combine all the height blends together, and they all use max lighting. So the first one there, I combine this guy here, foreground, and that is the background, max lighting. And same thing with the main ornament and this previous blend. Then adding that. And adding this together. And then I created a normal map. And down here I have my folds. So this was supposed to help add wrinkle to the carpet. And I'll demonstrate that much later on after this. But I use a crease node, mess with the warp and the distorter, transform it. So I increase the scale, and then I use a make it tile photo grayscale. So I'm actually trying to tile it back up together because with the transform, the tile is ruined, so it's cut off on all sides. So using this node fixes that a bit, and I'm just messing with a bit of the mask warping in all directions to try to make it tile seamlessly. And then I use a save transform. That's just in case if I wanted to like move the offset, but I didn't do much with it. So setting that aside, I just use the histogram select, and I'm just highlighting certain parts of the folds here to make it more visible. And then I use a multi-switch grayscale to turn this on or off. So you have the option to turn on the folds or disable it. And then in case you do turn it on, I made a normal map off of that, but it's not showing because it's turned off. So I use a blur HQ, and I blend it together using the foreground and the background. And I guess I'll turn on the folds here just to demonstrate it. Um, oh, I see. Right. There we go. It was turned on, right? So you kind of see the folds here. And I can turn on the opacity. Then if I go to my 3D view and move the light in a certain way, you kind of see a little bit of the folds. I don't know if you can see it, but it's there, and it's influenced by the height map as well. Because then after this normal map, I convert that into a curvature smooth. So I'm using the AO. So I'm making an ambient occlusion off of this normal. And if I use a curvature smooth and a levels node to control my AO, and I use a grayscale conversion. So I turn off all the channels except the blue channel, and then I combine that together, set it to multiply, and you get this effect that you see it in an ambient occlusion node. And for the folds, going back to my blurish Q color, convert that to a curvature smooth, and I blur it slightly. And then going down to my height map, I use the levels node to only highlight the where the folds are going to take place. And I use the histogram range, and this is part of like, because I exposed the parameters where you had the option to make the folds more visible or add more contrast or changing the positions of it. And with this, I combine that with a histogram range off of this, but it's very, very slight. It's like really hard to see, but it's like I set it to 0.02 because anything a little bit higher, it really messes with the tufts. So you really get an effect where it's just a bit too intense. So it's like I'm really lowering it down to like a very small number. And then I combine it with this blend and I get the folds. So now where the folds take place, you have this darker area where it's pressing down against the carpet, and then the parts where it's sort of like a grayish, whitish, kind of like a gray slash white value, and it's actually pulling up, and the parts where it's black is pulling down. So I set it to subtract by 0.5, and that's like my height map and the normal map over here. And the roughness, taking the same normal map and I convert it into another curvature smooth, and I set the levels and I increase the roughness really high, not too high, maybe just having some details here and there. So I guess to kind of make it slightly reflective, but not too much. And then I use a histogram range to kind of like tone down the values there. And that's my roughness over here. And the grayscale pack, that's more for like combining my height and my ambient occlusion and my roughness into a pack. So this output has my height, roughness, ambient, or metallic, but there's no metallic, so that's gone. So I guess it's a good way to optimize, so that way you have all your grayscale maps into one instead of having to have multiple maps in one. You can just have this one map that controls everything. So I set that as an optional thing. And going back to my AO over here, so I set this to multiply, combining that and this. And I added my folds back slightly just to make it a little bit darker with a min darken of 0.5 and ambient occlusion. So yeah, so that's the end of the node there. And now before we go to the color, I created a mask for the background. So remembering back where I created, they end up creating a mask of all these shapes. And it's probably because for each one I inverted it. And then I use a blend of multiply. So I'm kind of like getting rid of where all the tufts, where all the ornaments are. So I'm only like getting rid of the tufts here for the background. And I'm doing it for each one. Inverting it, set it to multiply. Inverting this, set it to multiply. And this one is actually from my, I believe, Yeah, it's actually for my inner string color because I added like a third color to this part here, so it's disabled, but I'll show it in my demonstration. So we'll ignore that for now. So yeah, so for every mask, I just invert them and I combine them together using multiply. So this is the mask for my background because now I created a gradient map off my background and an HSL so that way I can control the colors, and that's going to serve as the foreground and the opacity being this. So that way it's only affecting outside where these ornament shapes take place. And then I added a gradient map for every single height blend. So scroll through them. And an HSL for each one. So I'm slowly adding piece by piece every single color of these ornaments. So using a using this as the foreground and then adding a mask off of this to get that effect. And this is from I think this is from the other shape that I disabled it, so nothing's happening. But it is there, but I have to turn it on. But the same follows for each one. It's like I'm slowly putting all the mask in and slowly adding color to each one of them. Same thing over here, based off of. All right, there's no opacity for this. But yeah, so adding that, adding this guy, based off of this. And now my color for this height blend here, combine, and then you get this effect here. And it's all set to copy, so. And now I added a gradient map of my ambient occlusion. So I turn it into a color, and combined with this, I added an add sub, and I put to like 0.16, and I guess it's just to make the tufts pop out just a bit more because beforehand, like beforehand the detail is there, but it's like I kind of made it pop out even more in comparison. So that is really showing the gradients and the definitions for the tufts. And then that's my base color for this. So yeah, so that's the entire step from the ornaments, building that, to making this carpet here. And I guess a better way to demonstrating all the effects that I've done. Let me go to 3D sampler. Yep, and here it is. And because since I exposed the parameters for each one in Designer, so it's a lot of parameters that I just exposed out of this. And doing it this way, when you export this SBSAR, I believe. So if you go to your package, right click, and you go to publish SBSAR, and then for the first time you turn on generate missing icons, and then you get this thumbnail for your material. And then once you publish it, then you can view it in 3D sampler or in Painter, because then It has all the parameters that you expose, going from the tiling, visibility, color, border visibility, and then my heights. And I'll go through each one. So like I expose the parameters for the patterns. So that way, once I switch them, you get this pattern here, pattern 2, and pattern 3, which is a much thinner um, ornament shape. And then the tile amount, I this is I set it to 0. So I set up a function in Designer where the amount of the amount of tiling, it actually adds up by 4, I believe. So it's like you have 1, then 4. Yeah. So 1 is 2 by 2, and 2 is like 8 of them. So 3, 6, actually 9. But yeah, so you have different options. So, and then the ornament visibility, I guess just to have it in case, so you can turn this off, turn it back on, and then depending on, because in Designer, if you have the option to disable some of the parameters based on what's happening with this parameter here. So if I were to just turn off the visibility, some options get turned off. So I set it at, I kind of set it that way. So that way it doesn't have too much clutter. So I'm just kind of like getting rid of some of the settings if certain parts of the settings are turned off, if that makes sense. And then the middle ornament, you can turn that off. And then the corners, and then the show folds wrinkle effect. So if I were to, actually I gotta use a different HDR just to highlight this. I believe is in the fold intensity. Oh, of course, turn this on. So yeah, I had it turned off. So it was up to 2. So if you bring it down, you 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 actually turn on the folds, and then now I can lower the intensity here, and you can sort of see, at least based on this HDRI. But I guess if I switch to a different one, some of them are a bit more obvious. You can see there. This one's good. So yeah, you increase the amount, and this affects the height map as well. And then combining with the AO, you get this soft shadow right there. And the good thing is that you can change the position of the folds as well. So if I were to go to fold position, you can change that. You can change the range, make it softer to no folds at all, and the contrast. And I guess for more control, changing the height position just a little bit for further tweaking. And then here, I added the colors. So element 1, I believe, is this ornament here. And you can control the saturation and the lightness. And same thing goes for this guy over here. That. That flower in the middle, as well as the background. So I gotta increase the saturation. Now you'll be able to see the changes there, and as well as the border. And as well, you can turn off the border. So if you don't want to have the border, you can just take it off. And yeah, that's probably a majority of it. Oh wait, one more thing. That inner string I was talking about, where I wanted to add an extra color right in between this shape, and then doing so turns on another panel for this color here, so I can change this as well. But yeah, that's like the majority of all the parameters I exposed out. And this even works in Painter as well, so I can go there real quick. So let me turn this off, new, get my test plane, 2K. And then just to bring it into Painter, I'll just go to my SBSAR, drag it in, or you can go to that plus down there to import it, and then it sees it as a base material, and I'll add it to current session, and then drag this. So it'll take a bit of time, and boom, shown here, and all the parameters are still there. And of course, they will exist here. But yeah. So far, that concludes. Yeah, that concludes the material that I made. I mean, I do kind of apologize. I'm kind of going back and forth with it, and yeah, it's just a matter of I guess it's just a matter of sharing it to to the Substance website. You know, I might do that. So yeah, so hope you enjoy, and hopefully you learn a thing or two about it. I'll link that video in the description, what I saw about it. I don't know if I talked about it, but that's what inspired me to make it in the first place. So it's like it's a video of about someone making a carpet. So it's like cool. I thought I wanted to try that as well. So I learned it from him, and I end up making this. So I hope you guys enjoy. I hope you learned something from it. You know, hopefully me following along. Hopefully things make sense in a way for you guys. I mean, I try not to go too fast, but it's like a couple of things are kind of repeated, so it's like I want to make sure that you know following along. But you can always go back in the video to kind of see what confused you a bit or not. But yeah, hope you enjoy. Thanks.